So we tried to figure out what you guys wanted to do and how you'd want to hear it and stuff. And one possibility was, you bring us reviewer comments and stuff, and then we specifically attack those. But we didn't really get a lot of reviewer comments, and the ones that we got were ones that you can't really do anything with. So, so we figured that instead what we do is just give you a background on the whole review and reviewing process, and that we would give you sort of behind-the-scenes insights into how reviewers and editors interact with authors, and then also at the end provide some very concrete suggestions about how to deal in general with reviewer comments. And so we're going to tag team this talk. I'll give an introduction, then Jonathan will talk about reviewer types and fit some of his own comments into them, and then I'll give some more comments and wrap up at the end.
Okay. You're going to try to get them to guess which was the review that you gave versus the one that I received, not the same.
Although we did find out that I did review one of his papers once and it ended up getting rejected. We decided not to recapitulate that whole thing for you guys.
So even when you submit a paper and you think it hasn't got a hope, you're so invested in it that it still hurts when it's rejected. And this one was good anyway, I wasn't a competent reviewer in this case. But so even when you think it's like never ever going to get in, you just do it for the hell of it, and it gets rejected, you knew it was going to reject it, it still like cuts you to the quick. Because you've invested so much, like yourself you put in it. It's like a personal attack. So I couldn't face it again, having rejection again. So I had to implement a different strategy.
He's resented it ever since, and I'm pretty sure that's why he got a faculty job here, so someday he can submarine something.
I'm not allowed to now, am I?
Okay, so two of these comments were provided by you guys or one of your compatriots. One was a review that Jonathan received, and one was a review that I gave.
The first one is the one Jonathan received.
That'd be nice. No. I received similar ones. First, I think, Andrew, your one, I can spot that.
Mine was the last one, but I'll give a little context for it in a minute that won't make it seem not quite so good. You'll see in a minute.
The one I received was second from the bottom, which I thought was nice because it's quite a nice turn of phrase. It wasn't just like a throwaway comment review. It's really thought about it.
Okay. So, as you all know, this is how you publish a scientific paper, right? You start the paper, you write the paper, you submit it, you get the decision, and it's published.
And when you get to this submit, it's like work's over. It's like, thank God, right? I'm done with it.
Yeah, right. The end.
So all your effort has gone up to that point to submit. Push that submit button.
That's the way it really works. So, we don't need to necessarily go through the whole thing, but maybe just very quickly. Write first draft, errors, go back. Exponentially growing literature review, writer's block, then edit the paper. This is the great part. Send to supervisor, wait. Send to supervisor, wait. Eventually it makes it to supervisor, send to co-authors, wait. And then it goes back to here, supervisor, wait. And then, so it's an infinite cycle that you eventually sometimes break out with the decision, reject, and then you start all over again.
And also, the same paper will go through each of these iterations too. So, once you hit the decision there.
All very true. Okay, so here's what we want to do then. Give some background on how reviewers are chosen, and this is similar to an EEL that I gave last year. It was about behind the editorial process. But it's just to set a little context for where reviewers come from. Then Jonathan will do types of reviewers and examples from his own papers and reviews, and I will chime in there as well. And then some other things that weren't covered with those types of reviewers, and then what happens when you actually fail in the end to convince the reviewers, where do you go from there. So whenever you submit a paper, you're asked to recommend reviewers, right? And this is actually often an important decision because in my experience, as an editor and as an author, they pay attention to this, and you'll usually get one or two of those people. So it's an important decision to make, and so how do you make the decisions? So you might decide because it's someone you know. Obviously, you can't be a collaborator or work with them before, but it might be someone who you've had a discussion with, they know you, they know you're not a complete idiot from somewhere. So that's sort of a personal familiarity. the person, you might also pick on the context of whether they're an authority on the subject, and they might be like a young rising star authority or a senior jaded authority, as you'll see in a minute. Or you might actually, although this is rare, make conscious decisions based on the sex of the person or the age or the perceived difficultness of the person. And you see that these things all actually do influence rejection rate. So these are just data that I pulled from various publications in the literature. Basically what happens is professors and people go through this whole process for long enough that they get annoyed by the whole process and they start writing papers about why the whole process is biased and screwed up. And so that's what a lot of these are. This is the mean rejection intensity of people, reviewers, who have published in the number of high impact factor journals that they published in. So basically, these are theoretically these hot stuff, shooting star scientists who are really important. And you see that they tend to reject papers at a higher rate. So the superstars, theoretically, are more picky. So bear that in mind. Also, this is scientific age of the people reviewing the paper. Now this is really interesting to me. I was looking at this again today. It starts off, and then stays relatively constant for the first 20 years or so of the reviewing age of the reviewers. But then you start to get this bimodal distribution. And in this bimodal distribution, you get a couple people who their rejection intensity is really high. But then you have a bunch of people who just realize that, they're not the gatekeepers of science and that, they don't have to keep out every single paper and they become a little bit more permissive with age. And the truth is, I think that's a general trend with a few outliers. So older, more senior people, you might have more trouble getting to review your paper because they're too busy, but they're not necessarily more serious and picky, unless they're probably those same guys who are publishing more in the Nature and Science papers than top journals.
So old guys who publish in low-ranked journals.
Yes. Actually, old women who publish in low-ranking journals. Because now, so I tried to interpret this graph, and actually today went back to the original paper that this was based on. And I still don't understand quite what's going on. But these are different rejection rates, and I don't know why they don't add up, and it doesn't say in the paper. But females have a lower rejection rate than males.
This is added on to this. I was
Yeah.
trying to make sense of that too.
Maybe.
So
If you add all those numbers up, maybe they...
But is that corrected for the bias?
That is the bias.
yeah.
Well, I mean, but in general, there's more males.
But that's
So
what you're
this is
seeing
why
here.
these are
That's
higher.
the total percentage. Percentages of all the reviews.
Right, so it'd be
So-
interesting though if it was corrected for that imbalance,
So-
if it's still going to be the same.
I had a friend who was looking at scientific bias, males versus females, trying to test whether she thought it was true that female authors, first authors, were more likely to get rejected. And so she's looking at rejection rates and found there was no bias in rejection rate, but did detect that female reviewers were more likely to reject papers, that females had a higher rejection rate.
Which is the opposite of what we're saying.
It isn't. That's not saying that the rejection rate by females is lower or higher. The distribution is the same in terms of rejection rate.
It's not just compare these two bars.
If you compare the last bar to the first bar,
So the really high rejection rate, sure, but I'm saying the difference between here and here. So women reviewers some of them anyway, tend to have really high acceptance rates. Because you don't see a big jump to this greater than or 25 to 50% rejection rate.
the 51 is that's lower than that.
But you know what? It also says in here, there's really no statistical significance in here, so whatever. So maybe there is no effect. But I do like that summary of, this is all I have for you in terms of quantitative data on different types of reviewers. But all else being equal, what is it again? An old woman.
Publishing in low-ranked journals,
That's right, an old woman publishing in low-ranked journals.
of which there is like 3.
Okay, and then this is a listing of how associate editors choose reviewers. So they might take your suggestions, where is it here? Recommended by submitting authors. So that's somewhat important to some reviewers. So I think they'll usually pick 1 or 2 usually, or not usually, but sometimes. And then other things like, for instance, familiarity with the reviewer, so it's often people they know as well and that they know will also provide a good review. So they've gotten good reviews from these people before. Speed of turnaround time is less important. Odds he or she will reject a manuscript apparently is quite low. Although there's huge pressure now on associate editors to reject more and more manuscripts, so it's possible that maybe that will become more important as time goes on. Status of the scientist, not that important. And I would guess maybe also partly that's because really high status scientists aren't generally willing to provide reviews because they're doing so many other things. So familiarity and quality of previously reviews is how most editors are making their decisions regarding who to pick as your reviewers.
Which is a good thing, right? Good selection criteria.
Okay, so these are the different outcomes you get after you send your paper in. The associate editor picks the reviewers, sends it off to the reviewers, gets the reviews back, looks at them, makes their own decision. These are the general classes of things you get. Reject. Go home, send it somewhere else. We're not interested in ever seeing it again. Reject but reconsider is an extremely common one now, and that basically means that we might be willing to publish it if you can deal with the reviewer comments, but we're going to reject it because it looks good for our turnaround time. And that used to be called reconsider after major revision, but now it's reject and reconsider. Okay? So if you get that, it's actually not bad, in my opinion. It means you can work with the reviewers and editors. Except with revision, much less common nowadays, but still sometimes you can get it, and it can be minor revision or major revision, and you saw the other listing on the other flow diagram. And accept. Straight, for the first time, that's basically never happens.
What about a third category of just revision?
Revision?
Yeah, where does that fall in? Is it just in between reject and accept?
It falls in here. Because that means that they're not rejecting it outright. You don't have to resubmit it as a new manuscript, but they haven't made a final decision yet. So actually, this could say revision.
There seems to be a new trend for a new one, which is like redirect.
Oh yeah.
Is like, this is perfect, everything, the review is perfect, but we want it in our affiliated journal.
Yep. Yeah. I'll have something about that at the very end. But yeah, that's very common as well. There's such pressure on. Well, I want to get in that to the end when I talk about. I've got a little thing about open access journals in there now, and the difference between that and the traditional style journals, because some of them may be surprising to you. But that's what ends up happening a lot, and so I'll return to that. Now I also have, I'm not going to play it today, I played it last time, but there's a really funny video of Hitler getting his rejection from a journal that they've submitted. Have you ever seen this? Check it out online, it's really funny, unless you speak German, I heard. So it's like a subtitled thing about him sitting in in that movie Downfall, where right at the end everything's falling apart and he gets really upset because he realizes he's not going to win in the end, and it's all written about reviews and everything. It's really funny, but I won't play it. So that's background, setting up where all these reviewers come from and what the different outcomes are, and now we'll go into more nitty-gritty about the reviewers themselves, and Jonathan will get you started. I'm going to turn that right so you can see these pictures.
I think we need to keep lights for like film, Andrew.
Sorry?
Keep the lights.
Yeah, can we
Keep the lights, okay? Oh yeah, okay.
So, anybody who's had a paper sent out and received reviews knows that comments can differ drastically. So people are reading the same paper, right, but take very, very different messages from it. And so this is somebody else's scheme of reviewer types I stole. I've just taken a few of their stereotypical ones here. The types of comments you get. So that he classified them types of reviewers, but I'm really classifying them types of comments you get. So here is the first sort, probably the most common sort. So very few people are going to be true experts in your field, but most people are going to be familiar with it, hopefully, when they've been sent a paper to look at, and they'll try and do a reasonable job. They'll try and understand what you're getting at, try and check statistics. And so most reviews are like this. It's like they're putting in the effort, they're trying to do a good job. They're not experts, they're not going to pick up everything. And when I do reviews, often this is what I am too. You know, I'm sort of familiar, and I just try work through the manuscript. Does it make sense? And so these are like those solid comments you get, and they sort of help you revise and put together a manuscript which is better for like a broader audience, right? So that's fairly typical. Most reviews are written by soldiers.
And this I think is a key phrase. They'll tend to fall in line with the experts, if the experts have strong opinions.
Right. And so I've got like a string of reviews from one manuscript, using this example here. And this is a typical one from a soldier. It was reviewed by 3 people, right? And this is the soldierly review, basically. It's very typical of the sort of reviews I get. Standard, they're trying to help you. It's interesting, you know, you do something worthwhile, but you want to improve it. And there's a few areas here where I want you to clarify points, maybe a small additional analysis or something like that. So there's a good soldier. He's making an effort. He's not killing the paper, or he's not like selling it, whatever. He's just like, yeah, it's interesting. We can make it a little bit better. That's generally often how the review process works. And then here's my other comment here. So the same paper. So reviewer number 1, referee number 1. Yeah, it's an interesting paper. Yeah, most people can find it. Something worthwhile in there, good for the general audience in this journal. And then referee 2 has a slightly different opinion of the paper. And so referee 2, I wouldn't classify as a soldier reviewer. I think he's more extreme here. And so this is classified as the demo man sort of reviewer, right? So he's read the title. Already he knows his duty is to reject the paper, right? He's just looking for reasons how to do it. It doesn't matter how much effort it requires to do this. He's going to find that evidence to reject it. The paper must be stopped. It is dangerous, right? And more than just scientifically bad, there's something serious. There's a treaty on your own competence as scientist he's really worried about now. You're not just like undermining the field, but the whole of science. And so once the paper's been through this sort of touch, it's like hard to recognise afterwards. And so here's, first of all, there's obviously this paper has to be stopped. There's no point even going on any further with this paper. And just in case you need further support, pages and pages of evidence, of theory of why this paper should be rejected, and not only why it should be rejected, but if you even thought that it was worthwhile to approach this sort of analysis, you should do it in a completely different way, right? Here's a whole new theoretical concept where you might possibly think about approaching this type of analysis and redo your paper entirely. And so you read the first couple of paragraphs, and you sort of tend to sort of fade out after a while and say, oh, I'm not really interested in this. And so I moved on, and then I went back to, so I did actually get a chance to go back and address the reviewers' comments. So I had to reread them, which is rather painful. And then a couple of things just sort of came at me when I was rereading this comment towards the end here. It talks about another perspective, how to analyse this sort of data, this question, suggesting that this approach, in fact, will soon be reprised in a recent paper in Trends in Pathology, an upcoming paper, not yet published paper. And here's another one, in fact, there's another upcoming paper here. And suddenly I was thinking that maybe...
In a journal that hasn't even come out yet.
Right, so none of these have been published yet. And he suggests that, maybe these 2 authors in particular needing their sorts of papers from papers they haven't yet published. So perhaps, he mentions this Brooks chap a couple of times, I'm not sure he's very good, but perhaps there's some sort of bias in there a little bit, and he suggests that I should really cite this Brooks paper more and follow their conceptual approach. But, so I did get a chance to resubmit this paper, revise it, despite that demo man approach. And so even devastating comments can be saved if you have someone on your side too. So the demo man wants to destroy your paper, but you can have like a heavy weapons guy who can help save it, as long as he's on your side, of course. And so you have this sort of big play-off between heavy. So this is opposite to the soldiers, right? They're just doing a decent job, and the soldiers are always going to defer to these heavy weapons guys because these people think they're experts in the field, and these are the big hitters who can potentially sink or save a paper. Well, at least that's what they think, right? That referee too was obviously convinced that that paper was dead in the water now, right? But these heavy hitters can go a little bit too far, and once you end up looking a little insane, on rare occasions, yeah, these heavy hitters don't necessarily result in manuscript death.
And I want to say one thing in relation to that. Can you go back one too? So, so in this case, the heavy weapons guy, if they do love your paper, they will often sometimes think that it's actually quite obvious that everyone should love it. So they will sometimes only really bring out their big guns on their second reviews, because they will see what the other demo man said and basically do something to bolster your paper because they love it. So they really bring out the heavy weapons when those weapons become necessary. And that's actually sometimes the trick, because they don't think their heavy weapons are that necessary on the first review. And so sometimes you really have to try and get around that, and then they get on your side. And I'll return to another example of that a bit later as well.
It's like getting student comments back, course reviews, right? The first set of the comments you get, often they're very polarised, and the people who are loudest are the people who hate the course the most. So often reviews, people are like, oh, it's okay, don't even bother to submit course reviews.
But if they could then read those really nasty course reviews, they'd be like, wait a minute, give me another chance. And so that's sometimes what happens on the second round of reviews.
So reviewers get to see the reviews of the other...
Right. Yeah.
Always, yeah.
Anonymous still.
Except for this Brooks guy.
So in these rare occasions, so I had a difference with Andrew on the importance of the editor here. The editor can actually save a manuscript even from a demo guy or from one of these heavy weapon guys who wants to just kill your manuscript. Because they can seem a little bit insane sometimes when they're too vociferous in how deadly your manuscript is, or even conversely, how great they think your manuscript is, because they think the review is written by your mum or something like that, right? So they discount these crazed, really one-sided reviews. And so here, the editor writes me, after getting these really polarised reviews, would like to revise your manuscript, particularly as highlighted by referee 3, ignoring almost entirely referee 1, who's a good soldier, didn't really have that much significant to say, and conveniently for me, completely ignoring referee 2, who wanted to sink my manuscript without a trace. And so all my reviews were basically responding to referee 3, who did a reasonable job, lots of extra work, but was relatively sane.
So Jonathan said that he and I disagree on this, but I think there's a resolution between those two perspectives that I'm trying to make clear.
I think when we run through how to respond to views, I'll go over that again, the editor's role. And so here's another type of reviewer who will read until they see the first mistake in your manuscript, and then will say, I found a mistake, you have to reject it. And that's also quite common, because I've found myself fall into that trap also when I'm reviewing a paper. I see a mistake, the manuscript's wrong, you can't publish it, right? Reject it. And so again, we can go back to my favourite referee 2, who finds his mistake. So this was, I was looking at the range overlap of mammal hosts and how many pathogens they shared. And had this nice significant relationship. And then referee 2 said, your whole analysis is flawed here, because it's not possible for two species to share pathogens or pathogens to jump between them if they're not geographically overlapping. It's not possible. The whole analysis is flawed. Reject, right? This is why it's conceptually stillborn. So this is a really sniperly comment, right? And if you have a chance to respond, they're the easiest ones to respond to, right? Because you can disprove them. The fear is the editor will read the comment and say, oh, no, reject. But if you can revise, they're in fact the simplest ones to rebut. So I was given a chance to rebut this comment, and I said, well, in fact, there are 3 different ways pathogens might shift between hosts, which aren't now overlapping in space. They might have been overlapping in the past, right? Might be an intermediate host. Humans might have helped them move pathogens. All reasonably sane, believable explanations. But I only had that chance to rebut this comment thanks to the editor. It could have just been a swift reject. Because he said reject, obviously, he said reject.
Did you add those comments to the manuscript, those points?
No, just to the review. Because I was told to, well, the editor said respond to comments from referee 3, but I couldn't resist responding to comments from referee 2, but just in the letter to the editor, not in the manuscript. And here is conversely one of the most painful types of reviews. And there's two classes here. There's this medic who sees there's goodness in your manuscript and wants to help you, really wants to make it better. If you just added in this extra analysis, include this additional data, just did a little bit more, and you could also maybe add in this other data set as well. Compare your results to this other theory here. It's going to make your manuscript much, much better. And by saying how much you haven't done, or how much more you could do, it's highlighting how much you're missing, right? And again, once that reaches some critical mass, your manuscript that you submitted seems so insignificant, because there's all this other stuff out there that you could have done, but you haven't included. The editor's like, wow, you really did nothing at all, right? You've missed all these other important analysis you could do. And so, by adding all this additional information that you could have included, the medic wants to save your manuscript without killing it. And so this is similar to the engineer. I've grouped these two types together, who sees your manuscript and says, oh, it's great, I can see what you're doing. Why don't you also run the experiment, including this additional variable? Why don't you do another 1,000 replicates? Another 10,000 replicates? You want to do more because it's worth it, yeah? And by suggesting there's always more you can do, right? You're never going to have like the definitive result, definitive analysis. So this is the real pain of it. It's always really tempting when reviewing other people's manuscripts is to suggest the more they could do, because you can see there's all this expansive science you can test, right? And like, oh, I'm not doing it, but I could suggest somebody else could do it. Wouldn't it be interesting?
So sometimes medics and engineers, they know that they are in that category, and they know that if they make a whole bunch of suggestions, it might just be one of the things that the editors will say, oh, that's just too much. So sometimes they'll start off with their first paragraph saying that, look, I know I've done a whole bunch of stuff and made a whole bunch of suggestions, but I really think that you should consider this paper again, because if they can do any of this, it's going to be really wonderful. So I think medics and engineers are sometimes self-aware that what they're doing can potentially kill a manuscript otherwise, and they try to counter that with a statement at the beginning. I'm commonly in that category.
I do that too, because yeah, it's always so tempting to suggest, oh, you could answer this really important question with the data that you have in hand if you just did this. So when writing your review, you might want to have a separate note to the editor. I think Andrew's going to cover that later. You might want to say something like that. The manuscript's good, if the data is worth publishing as it is, but it'd be really cool if they did something else before you accidentally kill it. And so...
Yes, it's basically they say, look, all this stuff I'm doing, I'm not saying to kill the paper.
Right.
But they
And
just
say
want to make
that clearly
clear.
to the editor, right? Like, you know, sometimes you can write one review, sometimes like to the authors, and then you have a very clear message to the editor what you think should be done to the manuscript. Because you don't tell the authors that because the editor might have another idea of what they're going to do with the manuscript, etc. So I always found these sorts of comments dangerously, sometimes the most frustrating with my own paper, because where do you draw the limits of what is sufficient or what extra work you can do to satisfy the reviewers, unless they make it very, very clear what really needs to be done to cross that acceptance threshold. And so there's always there's more that can be done. So here's one quote from one of the referees, like, here's another analysis I could do. I could look at how much humans overlap with mammals which are sharing pathogens, and maybe that can explain some more of the data. So add in this extra covariate. And at some point, you might want to just argue that what we've done is sufficient, or if you're confident that adding in that additional data is not going to help. So, at one point, I felt bold enough to say that we're not going to do this, right? And here's a reasonable, practical reason why we can't do it. Humans are everywhere, therefore every mammal overlaps with humans. So incorporating how much humans overlap with one species or another is not going to help us. So here's answer. Not quite arguing with the referee, but suggesting that I appreciate your idea, but it's not possible or not helpful. But that's generally quite rare. So as a rule, right, if you can do it, do it. If it's easy, definitely do it.
Yeah, that's by far the most important.
Unless it ruins your paper, if the referee suggests it, just do it. And so here I've got annoying, why don't you use this different word in place of the word you're using, which is just as good? I'm like, oh, come on. You know, how's that going to help anything? And I was like, I'm just going to do it. And it was easy, it was like search and replace. I've done it. Referees now. And within 10 minutes I'd forgotten about it. Right?
Yeah, as long as it doesn't, and he says, as long as it doesn't damage the manuscript, just go ahead and do it. It doesn't matter. And I'll return to this a bit later, but if you do a bunch of things, then the editor and the reviewers are convinced that you're serious about this and that you're willing to make these changes. And so then if you have those other things that you're not going to do, they go, oh, that's okay. They seriously would want to do something like this, but they just couldn't. They did everything else, so we'll give them a pass on that one.
I'm buying goodwill here to not do this bit.
That's serious. Very, very true.
Okay, and here's another type of reviewer, right? Someone who doesn't want your paper to see the light of day because they think it's a really good idea, right? And it could be a really good paper. And they could probably do something similar, maybe even better, now they've seen how you're doing your data analysis. So in theory, spies are out there, right? But I don't think I've come across one so far, at least knowing, so I don't know what they look like.
So I actually think, looking at his things, I think that reviewer, that one who was very favorable toward Brooks, I think that could have been a spy. Because that spy was like, look, I've got this stuff coming out, you know, and it's going to be very similar, but better, so I don't want to see his paper published. So that person could maybe have been a spy, in my opinion.
Saboteur.
Saboteur, sure. Or delayer, anyway.
So these were all quotes from one paper, and I felt confident enough to go through them because the paper was accepted finally by the journal we submitted to, which got those reviews. And also it got recommended by the faculty of thousands. So certainly some people thought it was interesting. And just to boost my own ego, if no other reason, I've got the quote here, sort of conflicting with our nice referee too. You know, addresses one of the most important questions in parasite evolution. It's crucial to understanding facts of disease emergence. So, same paper really, hasn't changed form, it's still conceptually stillborn, but people are taking different parts of it, appreciating it is what a value it has in it. So, I talked a little bit about how I review stuff, and I think as a rule, soldierly, I try to do my best, right? I do not often, pull out heavy weapons to kill a paper, knock it down, but sometimes it does happen. But I do have some, unfortunately, sniper-like tendencies. I try and rein them in a little bit. When I do see like a flaw, I'm like, ha, I've got it. I've got the error, right? But I've got to be careful about that. Because sometimes it is like a fatal flaw, and other times it's just an error which can be rectified. So you've got to be careful about that. No need to reject a paper just because there's an error somewhere in it. And that's all the results that hinge upon it are like wrong from that. So this was Andy's suggestion to go back to some of the my own reviews. I didn't delve too deep back in time, but here's somewhere I realised that often I can be fairly harsh in my reviews, maybe not as harsh as Andrew, but alright, so what they're trying to do didn't seem so crazy, just not very new maybe. and they don't propose any new method either.
But it's this paraphrase. It's like, okay, editor, come on, if you accept this, then you're really degrading your journal.
It was a methods journal. And just in case they didn't really take home this message here, I just added it, basically the same thing again. Without saying as much, I'm suggesting to the editor maybe they'll think about rejecting it. So, when I was reading these again, I was thinking, oh, that's not really so helpful to the author. It's not going to help them revise a manuscript and improve it. I'm saying forget it. And so, this is not an especially helpful review. Maybe this paper doesn't deserve to see the light of day, but maybe I was just a bit harsh and this was a bad day. So, I don't think it was published actually. In fact, I know it wasn't. But so maybe I did kill that one.
I think that, you know, those sniper and demo man and all that, I think the same person can be one or the other. And I think that what often happens is, it depends on what your motivation is as a reviewer. If you have a personal stake or interest or in a journal, then you care about the integrity of that journal per se. And then you're more likely to be a sniper or to have comments like that because you just know you don't want it in the journal. Right? So you just get it out of the journal and don't worry about it. But if you don't really care about the journal, then what you realize is by rejecting it here, it's still just going to get published. You're not keeping it out of the literature. So in that sense, that's when you tend to be more of a medic or a, soldier or I can't remember the other one now, but the engineer, is because you realize that this manuscript is going to go somewhere. And so you might as well work with it now, because as soon as you do this, you probably never saw that manuscript again.
It's a straight out rejection. They'll probably resubmit somewhere else, unchanged, right, unimproved.
Right.
So this is.
And he probably won't get it again the next time, because there's 100 qualified reviewers out there or more. So it'll get published. So if you really think it's bad and you want to keep it up, and if you really think it's bad, then it's better, in my opinion, to work with it and make it better. Try and fix it if you can. Because if you just get it out of that journal, it has no effect on the literature whatsoever. But if you care about that journal, like as an associate editor, you often provide reviews and decisions that are kind of the same. And then you actually care about the journal itself. And then you say, well, that's not good enough for this journal. So I think you can have different identities along those axes depending on what your motivation is and whether you care specifically about the location where you're going to send, where it's being submitted.
So that was a bit of an embarrassing review when I went back to look at it. But I did see I can be nice too. Quite a well-written paper. I quite like the style, quite informal. I like that. I enjoyed reading it. I wish I could have read more. Right? And I thought, oh, that's awful too. And that review is also not especially helpful to the authors. It's like some horrible sycophantic I did have some more critical comments later on.
Would you say it also matters, Jonathan, how much of a hurry you are when you are reviewing a manuscript?
How much a hurry, you say?
Yeah. I mean, are you going to soldier through a manuscript if you've got, 5 things you have to do today? Or are you just going to be demo man and get it off your desk?
Yeah, well, I always like to sit on a review before I send it. I never like just write it and send it off. I think because of that, because I know I can be swayed by my mental state.
I think snipers often occur when they're in a really big hurry, right, and they know that they don't like the paper. They just want to get a good decision, get a clear decision to the editor so they can get it off their desk. They don't want to soldier through the whole damn thing, right, or medic through the whole damn thing when they know it's going to be rejected anyway. So they just snipe it and be done.
Right. And then final, this is not really this is like when I'm doing reviews myself. Equally as important, I think I should know your limits and what you're reviewing too. And there are many papers I read, the analysis are like completely different field. The stats are above my head. They develop some new model or something, and I just haven't got a good conceptual grasp of it. And I'll always admit that, if not to the authors, at least to the editor, to say, I've not reviewed this chunk of the paper because I'm not an expert. This was a comment You admit to it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That sometimes you receive a review and it's very clear, and that's nice, right? You get reviewers like, you've written something, it's a bit negative, but they've given you a good direction of where to go with this. You're like, okay, I know how to improve this manuscript, address this reviewer's comments, right? Revise, resubmit, the reviewer's going to like it. Okay, so it's obvious what we do. You reformat the manuscript and you put it in the context suggested by the referee. Okay, expecting this is it, it's going to be happy now. Next process is accept, right? But you've got to remember that just as my reviewers also differ in their opinions, also here again, so pleasing one reviewer, not quite please all of them, right? And so when you hit something like this, apart from opinion, this is where you do appeal to the editor, like, all right, I've got this conflict of opinion, I've done it both ways, like you decide. Right? We're trying to do our best here.
Okay.
Other things.
So Jonathan had done those things, and I just saw a couple of additional things that might give some background on how the review process works before we come to the really specific conclusions. Any questions on the different reviewer types?
Well, are you going to go on to how to respond to those?
The thing is, it ends up being quite specific, but we'll have some general suggestions, yes. But we're not going to have specifics to each one of those individual types. So this is really important because there are always comments to the editor that you can't see, and those could say something quite different. So they could be quite nice to you in your review, but very damning in the comments to the editor. So you can try to helpful to you while telling the editor, look, you don't want this. So you just have to bear that in mind, because sometimes you'll see these reviews and you'll say, and then your paper's rejected or something, and you'll say, well, I don't get it, I can do all of this. But meanwhile, there were some comments to the editor. So that's not a reason not to fight for your review, but just bear that in mind. They can be positive or negative. Now, that comment that I made about this is the worst paper I've ever read was to the editor. Okay? It wasn't, the reviewer never saw that. So I just want to give you one other example of this. So I'll read this quickly. This is to the author. This is a Nature review, the second round. This study is very interesting and thought-provoking. The authors are fascinating system and lots of data. They address big questions in evolutionary biology. The present version differs from the previous one in the addition of several large experiments that specifically address the reviewers' comments. These experiments ameliorate several of the concerns, although not all. Sounds reasonable, eh? Here's what I said to the editor. Despite being interesting and thought-provoking, this manuscript is tedious, complicated, and confusing. This remains the case after multiple readings. In the end, I'm left with the depressing conclusion that I really cannot be sure as to whether or not the analyses are fully appropriate. I expect that most other readers, particularly non-specialists, would feel the same way. Moreover, I think the MS is saddled with critical ambiguities and inconsistencies regarding its specific application to blank. I cannot, in good conscience, put my stamp of approval on this effort. If you continue to consider this manuscript for publication, it's probably best you send it to a different reviewer. And part of the reason why that last part comes in there, yep.
I'm just wondering why would you send two different messages?
Yeah.
Why
Because this was followed by an incredible number of comments that were helping the author to improve the manuscript. But I just didn't want to be rude, right?
So you want them to incorporate those changes and resubmit
Well, I
somewhere
wanted to be
else?
helpful in terms of things, but and so what I'm saying here is, look, because the author was basically had incredible number of comments that were very misdirection. They were not actually answering the problem. They were just trying to swamp the reviewers by detail and all this other stuff. And so what I know about this is that Nature and Science, because of a couple of major problems they had recently, really want to get all of the reviewers on board. And that's another reason for my later comment about the editors. Because if they have reviewers that don't want it accepted and then it gets published and found out to be flawed, then the reviewers stick up their hands later and say, wait a minute, I said reject that. This happened a couple of years ago in some quite high-profile cases. So they want all the reviewers on board. So they keep coming back, the same reviewers, until you can try and convince them to say yes. And I said, look, just give up on me. Because I don't believe these guys, I don't believe what they're doing. If you want to keep considering it, send it to someone else. Right? So it's just by way of saying, look, I'm not the person to review this anymore. Now, if you're going to continue, I can't be a part of it. So that's a key point, but there can also be very positive comments in the comments to the editor that you can't see. So just bear that in mind, that you're not necessarily getting full information. You might be getting all the information about how to improve your manuscript. Meanwhile, there's some negative comments behind the back that says, look, you know, I just don't think it's good enough for this journal. This kind of dichotomy is relatively rare, I would say, but it does sometimes happen. Now, this one follows up on something that Jonathan was saying earlier, and that I alluded to as well. And that is, you can get the reviewers on your side. So if you have this crazy reviewer number 2, who's, you know, just clearly trying to give you a hard time or be demo man, or basically demo man, the other reviewers who like your manuscript, particularly the heavy weapons guys, are going to get pissed at the demo man. Particularly if they see it on the round of reviews. They're like, what the hell? This guy is clearly just trying to submarine this paper. You know, and so I am going to start arguing on his behalf to get the paper published. So that really helps if you are, well, and the way to get the reviewers on your side, well, you'll see in a minute. But sometimes you can get one reviewer arguing for you against the other reviewer. And that really helps in how you write your comments to the editor as well. Let me give you an example. This is close to what I wrote. I couldn't find the actual quote. This was once again a Nature paper that was published recently. I think you should ignore the comments of the other reviewer. They're clearly biased, and he or she is just out to find any possible way to reject the manuscript owing to an obvious conflict of interest. It was so blindingly obvious in the review that this guy had an incredible conflict of interest with the paper he was reviewing. And he was just trying to come up with every ridiculous, total demo man. But it was like this, you know, reviews this long that were just totally off base. And so the authors had very considered responses to all of them, explaining why that was wrong. And so when I got this whole package, I also argued on behalf of the author.
Which tends to point, like, should you be choosing reviewers that are in your specific subfield? Because at that point, you always have a conflict of interest.
Right, I think that's actually a little tricky. You have to worry about reviewers that might be in direct conflict of interest.
But then the editors would want someone who's in the subfield and will understand that literature, hopefully.
Yeah, there's a bit of that tension, I'd say, yeah.
I mean, some journals you can list people you do not want to be a reviewer, but equally I know editors will deliberately sometimes choose someone on that list.
I basically never say that. I never say for reviewers. Extremely rare cases. Because, yeah, some editors will directly send it to those people you say not to review. I think it's best to... Sorry?
Why would they have that then? It just seems like,
Some
unfaithful.
Some editors pay attention to it. Some editors will not send it. I once listened to a thing like this. It was when I started graduate school, and there were 2 editors that were there, and one said, "Oh, I always send it to those people," and the other guy says, "Oh, I never send it to those people."
At least they know there's a conflict between the reviewer and the author's there. They can interpret comments more wisely.
My favorite one was I got a paper to review from Nature. Well, no, it was a thing. Here's this paper. Would you like to review it? And I looked at it and said, oh, that sounds, you know, pretty relevant to what I'm doing. Yeah, I'd like to review that. Didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks, and I wrote back and said, you know, wait a minute, I thought I was supposed to review this paper. And they said, oh, we're very sorry. You were actually listed as someone that they did not want to review it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, now I know who doesn't want me to review their work. And I didn't have any bias. I have no idea why they said that. But, I want to give you one more example. This was a big, this was another Nature paper, and this was a big exchange here, where the other reviewer was so, well, actually, it wasn't another reviewer, but someone who was very closely related to what was going on. And they were very upset that the paper got published, and so they wrote a comment. And then I had to review the comment, and the comments were just inflammatory. This is on the second round of the thing. My dislike of the original communication, this comment by the person on the paper that was published that I'd reviewed, was not that it failed to accurately identify some concerns, but rather the tenor and focus of the communication did indeed seem an attempt to tear down the tower that someone else has built, which Nature says is not supposed to be the nature of their comments. It read like a turf war between 2 groups that work on similar questions in the same system, which is not something of value to the readers of, well, Nature. In essence, it was a long list of criticisms. The details of the paper that came off as sour grapes was not constructive. Gave me an uneasy feeling about the motivation of the author and the communication, which made me feel that the original version would have done more harm than good. So basically, I was here again reviewing on behalf of the author. like arguing on behalf of the author. Because, and the way this often happens is where you have a very critical reviewer, and then you are very polite and considered and respectful in your responses. Then that's a good way to get the other reviewers on your side, because even if you can never convince that other reviewer, the reviewers who are reasonable will look at that and say, oh, well, you know, they're doing what they should. You know, it's quite reasonable. And the other reviewer is just a complete biased idiot, an asshole. And so that falls in with this idea of don't be rude. So that my response to that last one was basically to rude reviews and comments of another author. And so you get this often as an editor, and you try to sanitize the reviews that are really rude. But you can also get rude responses to reviews. And so I was an associate editor for a paper where the authors were extremely rude in their responses. And so I wrote back to the lead author of the paper, who was not the one who submitted it. I would also like to mention that I felt the responses to the reviewers and associate editor, me, were phrased in such a dismissive way as to cause potential offense. I, at least, undertook my suggestions so as to improve the author's MS. It is therefore disappointing to have these suggestions thrown back at me in such a flippant and seemingly arrogant manner. I realize that arrogance does not characterize the authors, but I want them to realize how the particular style of response can upset the reviewers of their manuscript.
I've reviewed papers and had responses back from the authors who have been borderline rude, and my immediate response then is to find a way to reject the paper.
If you piss off the reviewer, that's the worst possible thing you can do.
Because reviewers are doing this for free. It's not a job. They're like on top of everything else, and they're doing their, most of the time they're like soldiers doing their best. And like, right, we make mistakes, but if you're rude, suddenly all our sympathy just vanishes, right? Evaporates immediately. Not really don't do anything.
It's sometimes hard, it seems to be, respond to flippant comment without yourself. Like, the idea of, like, this should be rewritten by someone who actually speaks English. Like that first one.
You just, all you have to do is say, in fact, all first authors were...
But that sounds flippant. We all know how to speak
No,
English.
if it's factual, like...
But you would also apologize that you had not paid more close attention to the wording of the manuscript, and you've done a better job in this revision.
Yeah, we've done a thorough edit of the manuscript.
Thank you for pointing out this lack of attention to detail.
What happened when the editor is on your side, and so you get all of the review comments or from the reviewers, the editor said is on your side, and you won't send it back to the reviewer, so it will be accepted right away. And there's only one reviewer, then is reject. So this one is an outlier, said it's bullshit, and all of the other reviewers said it's good. How do you have to, because if the editor is in your side and your reviewer won't see it again, do you
So you're saying,
explain it, oh yeah, you know, it was wrong because it didn't consider that or that, or you just ignore it because the editor is in
Okay, so wait, are you saying that the editor will look at it again?
Yeah, only the editor, but he doesn't want it to send it back to the reviewer. And there's only one reviewer, then you say that it's bad, and all of the other are on your side. So it's almost accepted, but you defend, you do.
I think this fits closely in with the example of the paper that Jonathan was talking about.
So I'd always, when editor's on your side and wants to get it published, you're golden basically. I'd still always address the comments of reviewers, but you can argue why they're wrong, right? And you can argue strongly why they're wrong, because they're never going to see it again.
Probably.
Well, if the editor says it's not going back out to review, just tell them why the review is wrong.
Right, but you have to still be polite, because the editor, this does happen, so sometimes if they're not certain about something, they will extract out your response and just say, oh, I wanted quick input on this. That does happen. So you still have to be respectful and polite. But yeah, you don't, if it's not going to go out again, you've got one really bad review that the editor hasn't told you to pay particular attention to, then you have almost a free pass on actually changing things in your manuscript if you don't want to change them.
Yeah, explain why you are right and very politely why the reviewer is wrong.
I just want to say, sometimes you get editors who have a sense of humor, and you really should, take advantage of these editors. So I just want to give you an example. This is from the acknowledgments of a paper I published last year. APH, me, thanks to Hendry Ranch, Napa, California, for providing the accommodation, office space, and fine wine that proved so important in the preparation of this manuscript. So read the acknowledgments of the first submitted version of this MS. The deciding editor then noted, the acknowledgments recognize the contribution of wine to the work. In a light-hearted jibe, I'd like to suggest that perhaps there was too much wine consumed during the writing, as I find the introduction to be lacking in certain respects. In response, we offered, well, the lead author did drink a lot of wine during the preparation of this manuscript, and so it is possible that his faculties were occasionally compromised. Consumption decreased somewhat during the preparation of this revision, and so perhaps clarity will be improved. He will return to drinking heavily again immediately after this paper is accepted. So you can find those editors who you can have some fun with, and then the journal actually will sometimes let you work with it. So it's not all serious sparring and positioning and stuff like that. Sometimes it is quite fun.
So, in general, the acknowledgements, anytime humour creeps into a manuscript.
Yeah, that's right. You get a fair amount of leeway in the acknowledgements. Okay, so in summary, how to respond to reviewers. Here's an example of a letter to an editor that was published recently. It's called "Letter from a Frustrated Author of a Journal Paper." Enclosed is our latest version of manuscript 1996-0222-RRRRRR that is the revised version of our paper. Choke on it. We have again rewritten the entire manuscript from start to finish. We even changed the goddamn running head. Hopefully we've suffered enough now to satisfy even you and the bloodthirsty reviewers. There's a bunch of more stuff. Then, this is going now to Jonathan's thing, or one of his examples. One perplexing problem was dealing with suggestions 13 to 28 of reviewer B. As you may recall, that is, if you've bothered reading the reviews before sending your decision letter, that reviewer listed 16 works that she felt we should cite in this paper. These were on a variety of topics, none of which had any relevance to our work, blah, blah, blah. The only common thread was that all 16 were by the same author, presumably someone whom reviewer B greatly admires and feels should be more widely cited. To handle this, we modified the introduction and added, after the review of the relevant literature, a subsection titled Review of Irrelevant. It discusses these articles and also duly addresses some of the more asinine suggestions from the other reviewers. Assuming you accept this paper, there's a bunch more after this, but assuming you accept this paper, we would also like to add a footnote acknowledging your help with this manuscript and to point out that we like the paper much better the way we'd originally submitted it, but you held the editorial shotgun to our heads and forced us to chop, reshuffle, hedge, expand, shorten, and generally convert a meaty manuscript into stir-fried vegetables. We could not or would not have done it without your input. So this is one way to respond to reviewers, but I don't really recommend it. Instead, this is what we recommend. These are actually concrete things that I think we agree on pretty closely, and we'll see if we can come to final agreement as we suggest. Now, this is the one we slightly disagree on. You need to convince the reviewers, not the editor. And I say usually because Jonathan provided a good example when that's not the case. If the editor has made it clear that you don't have to convince the reviewers.
Right, so your example there, editors have made a decision to post.
But I would argue that most of the time you need to convince the reviewers, okay? Because journals want to get their reviewers saying accept. They don't want to get them saying reject. By the way, you're free to leave, but we were told we had a couple extra minutes, so we're not rushing. That's actually really important. Don't just argue to the editor that the reviewers are idiots, okay? Because it usually won't work. The editor has usually picked the reviewers for a reason. Familiarity, remember? Quality of previous reviews. And so if you call this person they picked as an expert and a good person and someone they know to review this manuscript an idiot, then you're not going to get much mileage out of that. Now this I think is something that's really important for reviewers to see, is take each reviewer comment, the whole thing, break it out in a block, and then give a specific response to that. Don't just answer some of the reviewer's comments. Don't just cut a little bit out of the reviewer comment and put it there and then reply to it. The reviewers, particularly the reviewers who didn't give that comment, want to read the whole thing, and they always do. Reviewers will always read the comments of the other reviewers and the responses to them. So you want to give them context. And that means if they say something positive, damn well leave it in there too, right? Even if there's nothing to do with it, leave it there, because then the other reviewer will see it.
And so with this, if you missed one comment that they've made, a reviewer has made, well, that's damning too. All they'll focus on is the bit that you didn't include, like the one comment you missed out. And certainly in my manuscripts, which can be quite heavily reviewed, it's not unusual for my responses to be as long, twice as long as my original manuscript. Right? It could be 20 pages worth of comments and responses.
Yeah. This is, we've already highlighted, be polite and respectful. Now, the reviewers may well be idiots, at least with respect to your manuscript, okay? And you may know that, but they don't think they are. And you have to convince them. So never imply in the manuscript that the reviewers were idiots, even subtly, okay? Because it will do what Jonathan said, it will get them against you, even if they were ambivalent previously. Now, I sort of split this up. Be appreciative of the reviews, because the reviewers, particularly the soldierly ones, really put in a lot of effort. But don't be sycophantically so. Oh, you're such a wonderful reviewer, it's so great, you're such a wonderful... you see that in everyone, this is a great comment, and then, but it can be like, change the comma here. This is a great comment, thank you so much. Keep that to a minimum, because it just gets annoying. I don't know if you feel that way, Jonathan.
Yeah, so, and when they're like, those short comments they have, like, change the punctuation, thanks, done.
Yeah.
Like, that's all you need.
Yeah, done.
Great, thanks for your editorial input. We've revised this paragraph to comply with your great, you've added in a comma. It's like, okay, changed.
Yeah.
But sycophantically, I've seen some people respond like that, over that top, put it down, and that also cuts down the length of your responses too.
I've seen several papers that thank the reviewers in the acknowledgements. That seemed weird to me. Is that
That's typical, yeah.
is that in like certain cases where you really feel like they improved the paper, or is it just like a standard?
No, I
thing
think
to
you
do?
just use it as a matter of
Sometimes it's
course.
quite standard. Unless they've just helped you with editing or something,
It's just a typical courtesy. I don't think the reviewers, unless they're like really in that field, they never go back really and read the acknowledgements to see if they're acknowledged. Because of course they're always anonymous, so it always says and anonymous reviewers. But yeah, it's just a courtesy, it's just a professional.
And with this one also, even though you're being scrupulously polite, not sycophantic, sometimes reviewers are wrong, right? And so you have to tell them they're wrong. You can't just do what they tell you to do if they are genuinely wrong.
Right.
You just have to break it to them very gently, very politely that, sorry, we explained poorly our justification for this.
That's exactly the way to do it. Yeah.
And then rephrase it and say, here's why we did what we did.
So that kind of, he just said this basically, that if the reviewer just missed something or just made a mistake or something like that, you say, well, we have now made our rationale more clear, we've now made this more clear. Basically, you say that it was our mistake, we didn't explain it well enough. Here we're going to explain it in this comment well, and then we've also changed the manuscript so that that's now apparent in the manuscript.
And plus, this is true, actually, when the reviewer has missed something that you think is obvious, it's because it hasn't been so obvious. They're the people who are going to read your manuscript the most closely. No one else is ever going to go through it in that much detail. And they've missed something, it's not been obvious, even if you thought it has been. So it's valid information, right, even if they're whether interpreted is incorrect.
That's all we have for responding to reviewers' comments. I think that last page is really all you really need. Yep.
Is there a way to write to the reviewer? The reviewer, the editor? Is there for the editor only kind of?
Yeah, so you got to be really careful with that, because I have many times had the editor send those comments directly to me.
Yeah.
Don't write the editor explaining why the reviewer is a complete idiot.
In situations of conflicts of interest.
You got to be really careful there too, because
Often stuff's just cut and pasted and sent back to the reviewers.
it'll get sent straight. It can often get sent straight to the reviewer.
Do you have any suggestions for the ones where it's conflict of interest in the sense that you have the impression that it's maybe your paper opposes their paper?
I think you still have to follow all those regular procedures and try and be respectful and try and improve your manuscript in such a way that it makes things more clear and acknowledges the previous work that came. And I think that's the only.
So in a couple of cases where I've submitted a manuscript and there's been some issue, generally not a major one actually, but it's like how much more do we need to do, like because of these damn rules or something. And I've written directly to a known associate editor, but it's someone I've had contact with in the past, or there's been some other connection with, and directly contacted them. I'm probably not legit, but probably happening. So, you know, rather than responding through the journal, I have done that, contacted them directly. And say we're revising here. These reviewers are like crazy opposite angles, like we're going to go down this road or this road, you know, which way should we go?
Yeah. But just remember that your comments to the editor you can't assume they'll be confidential, and they often won't be. And it'll just piss the other reviewer off. And just remember that they pick the reviewers that they think are appropriate for your manuscript.
Would they purposefully try to get people that are at opposite ends?
Sometimes. Sometimes not, sometimes. So I thought, okay, just take a couple of seconds. So your responses didn't work, your paper got rejected. I just wanted to this is similar to something that I've done in the previous one, but I think it's worth just pointing out that that it's typical. Okay, rejections are really common. So, I mean, I'm an associate member of this department. I've had a faculty position for 10 years, you know. So you might think that, you know, I don't get papers rejected that commonly. Yeah, you know, my own students can tell you it does happen. But I thought, you know, by most standards, I'm a reasonably successful professor. And so I just wanted to give you some statistics to show you that it's extremely common to get papers rejected. So I've had a total of 210 submissions in my life with my name on it. And 120 of those were accepted. So that's a 57% success rate. So that's actually quite reasonable. But even though it's reasonable, that means 43% of my submissions were rejected. Now, I can make it look even worse for me because a lot, 32 of those, or 42 of those, or 32 of those were, you know, invited editorial things or comments or things that I was an editor for, right? So those don't count because the acceptance rate there was 100%. So if you get rid of that, the acceptance rate goes down to 47%. So less than half of the papers that I submit, the individual submissions are accepted. But also unfair is the fact that I've submitted 31 papers to Nature Science, PNAS, and things like, and PLOS Biology, although not that much anymore. And the rejection rates there are 95%, right? So mine is at 97% rejection from Nature Science and things like that, excluding invited comments and editorial things. So let's just get rid of those two. So let's get rid of all the things where acceptance was guaranteed, and let's get rid of all the things where rejection was basically guaranteed. So and then you get back to roughly 57%. Okay. Now, one thing that students often wonder is, does having my professor's name on my paper matter? I don't know whether that's true, but if you look only at papers where I was first author, the acceptance rate is quite a bit higher. I don't know if that's just because I'm a better writer, or if because, you know, they perceive that, oh, Hendry, I've known he's done good work in the past. So that's not like my name being on the paper, because my name's on all these papers, but there probably is name recognition that goes on. So I think it probably does help, but it also helps to show your independence by not having some papers without your supervisor on. And just for fun, because I'll show you something in a minute, papers are ultimately accepted at the first journal to which I submitted them. 61% if you include basically, I don't know, all of these basically up to here. So it's 61%. So I'll give you that reason why I'll give you that number in a minute. And then ones in which I'm first author is 64%. And the reason why I gave you that is because, well, look at that, I've had a paper rejected eight times, 8 different journals. This is other people. These are people who are 61 different authors with at least 10 papers in 5 major ecology journals. This is their basic acceptance rates on the first time they submit their paper, the second time, and the third time they submit their paper. And so there's huge variation, and my numbers fall right in there. So the point of this is that even successful people in ecology and evolution, rejection is really, really common, except for this dude here.
That's like guaranteed rejection.
No, that's guaranteed. These are acceptances. This is the acceptance rate. And this guy had 100% acceptance rate.
Published one article.
Sorry?
Published
Yeah.
one article.
10.
Once.
It's at least 10, yeah. So, but you know, I'm sure he's over here now or something, he or she or whatever. Anyway, the point being that it's extremely common, so I guess you say get over it, basically. If you think your paper's decent, if your supervisor does, if your co-authors do, then it is decent and publishable. It's just that you get these random people out there. You get Jonathan Davies after he didn't have his coffee in the morning. You get me after I don't know, I have a hangover in the morning and I'm in a hurry. You know, it just happens. That's the funny thing about science, is it's an enterprise of individual humans, right? And you know how everybody varies and how they think and what they do and how uptight they are and how uptight they aren't. And you're taking almost random draws from a couple of hundred potentially suitable people to review your manuscript. So rejection is not a reflection necessarily of the quality of the work. If it made it through your co-authors and your supervisor and all that, your work is fine. You just have to find the right combination of journal and reviewers. So when I submit a paper, and what I tell my students when they submit papers, is basically know where you're going to submit it next. That way when it's rejected, well, you're just a few days away from submitting a paper.
But if you're getting everything accepted, right, you're not aiming high enough.
Yeah, that's
Because
true too.
you're never going to get a Nature Science paper unless you submit them, right? You're always doing very good, like Proceedings of the Royal Society, reasonable, well, good journal, right? But you've got to try for some of these high impact ones. We believe your work is good enough. So
My first one was accepted, my first submission to those journals. My next 30 were all rejected. I probably have submitted a lot less if it hadn't been that way. So, there's plenty and plenty and plenty of journals out there with large impact factors that you could submit your papers to. Just because it doesn't get into ecological monographs, you know, it might get into global ecology or biogeography or journal of ecology or Proceedings of the Royal Society or conservation biology or AMNAT or functional ecology or heredity. This is only the first 40 from Web of Science. And all of them have citation factors of 3 or above. So they're all respected, reasonable journals. And none of those are Science and Nature. Nobody's going to say, oh, you published in Ecologia instead of, I don't know, molecular ecology. You know, it's crappy paper. So I'm just saying that there's a home for your paper. It's a good paper. You just have to have a thick skin, and you have to, you know, bounce with it. You have to make improvements to it as you can. And this is just one small thing that sort of blends these 2 points now. This idea that you get rejected from one journal. I still say it's worthwhile making changes to the manuscript if they're useful changes based on the reviews you previously got. Not just because it'll make your manuscript better, but because it actually is possible that you will get the same reviewers. That's happened to me many times. I've got the same paper from multiple journals.
It's like killing also the review process. People resubmitting the same unchanged manuscript. You always got to, even the insane reviewers, there's generally some nugget in there that's useful. It can always be better.
And this is an incredible way to get the respect of your reviewers too. If you review a manuscript and you provide all kinds of, you're a soldier or even more especially if you're an engineer and you try to come up with all these cool things, but the paper gets rejected anyway because maybe the other reviewer was really negative. Then you get that same paper to review for another journal. Your opinion of that author shoots way up because they didn't have to do what you said, and yet they did anyway. That's happened to me with people. That's happened to me one time very clearly with someone who was not viewed well in the ecology literature because of some slip-ups apparently. My opinion of that person just went through the roof because they didn't have to do that, and they were really serious and conscientious about taking my suggestions, even though the paper had been rejected. Okay. Now, if you notice, Where are the open access journals on here? There aren't any. Okay? So this is the traditional style of publishing. But the other option, of course, is open access journals, of which there's an ever-increasing number. With the canonical one being PLOS One, and this was stats from last year, I think, with an acceptance rate of 69%, and they've already published more than 10,000 papers. Probably by now it's 20,000 papers. So the idea behind this journal is that as long as your work is technically correct, we will publish it. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering. We're not making a judgment on the quality of, or the importance of the science. We're only making a judgment based on its acceptability in a scientific perspective. Now, there's a whole, I just picked a few. Now, I imagine that many of you think this is great, because, you know, they're free, open access to everyone. But I did want to give you one particular insight into this, because I'm also involved with a bunch of these journals. What these are is a money-making enterprise. Traditional journals, they are allotted a certain number of pages per year. They have to stay within those pages, otherwise they have to pay out of society dues. Right? With these journals, they only make money if they accept papers. They only get paid when they accept papers. So what their entire goal, really, is to publish papers. So it's a completely different mindset, with both its goods and its bads. So for instance, I just edited a special issue for this journal here, and they were pushing so hard for every paper to get accepted. For example, they do special issues. You've probably gotten emails from them. Hindawai is the thing. Some of you will have gotten emails from these people saying, please edit a special issue for us. And what they want is for you to get in there, invite all your friends, and so if you invite them, you're less likely to reject them. And then those friends basically get their papers in there, and then they pay, and that's how the journal makes the money. This journal is called Open Ecology and Evolution. You will now get redirects from all the Wiley-Blackwell journals, redirects to this. Sorry, we don't think our space is limited in our journal. We suggest you consider Open Ecology and Evolution. We'll publish it right away. And I asked the editor of this, Alan Moore, he was talking about it, and I said, so is this a response to PLOS One? And he said, well, no, you know, we think that there's a lot of science out there that's, of course it's a response to PLOS One, he tells me, right? Because all these ecology and evolution rejects are going to PLOS One now, or wherever, and PLOS One is making money, not Wiley-Blackwell. So Wiley-Blackwell says, wait a minute, I know they weren't important papers, but we'll publish them as long as you pay us. Okay, so this is really the seedy underbelly of open access publishing. And I just want you to be aware of that. So in my opinion, this is where to start. In my opinion. Now I might deviate in opinion from a lot of things, but in my opinion, this is where to start. These are all well-respected journals. Their goal is to get the best possible papers into those journals. Their goal is not just to make money. As a matter of fact, they're all non-profits. Now some of these, and most of those other ones are not non-profits. Okay? But I do still publish here. In particular, PLOS One. PLOS One I published 3 or 4 papers in. Because it's the flagship of these kind of journals. And I have edited something for them, but I never will again. Never. Also, Evolutionary Applications has now had to switch to open access as well, because they couldn't get enough libraries, even though it was the best journal of the year and blah, blah, blah. Libraries won't buy journals anymore. Anyway, it's the whole self-reinforcing feedback loop thing.
Some of these other open access ones are money, is that? And there's 2 major publishers, each with like 500 journal titles, so they try to cover everything. And often the review process is minimal, but what they do is they'll have 200 or 300 associate editors on their editorial board, and they'll send just the papers out to associate editors to give their opinion, and that will be the sum total of the review. So often there's no feedback between reviews being sent to the authors and then the author responding. It's just like the associate editors make an opinion, publish or not that paper. So it's bypassing some of the more traditional process. Now, PLOS One, and open experience is now reviewing papers fully. It used to be just very lightly reviewed by an editor. now it's going out to full reviews. I know that because recently I've received and reviewed a couple of those papers. Plus, I've had a paper rejected from PLOS One.
Oh, wow.
In like the past 6 months.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah. So I've now got much more confidence in PLOS One and the journal. As previously when Andrew was publishing in there, probably there was like minimal review going on.
I just think the review process for that journal is, I like PLOS One.
PLOS One's a good idea. I'm supportive of PLOS One.
How much do they cost?
About $1,000, $1,500.
And in theory, they won't reject you if you can't pay. They'll still publish.
In theory.
Yeah. You might only be able to publish once.
So we've only got 5 more minutes. You can always send your work here. Journal of Negative Results. This is a real journal, I've noticed, but it's only published 12 papers in 8 years. But an even more exclusive and important journal that I think you should all submit to first is the Journal of Universal Rejection. This is a real journal. All submissions, regardless of quality, will be rejected. Despite that apparent drawback, there are a number of reasons why you might choose to submit. You send your manuscript here without suffering waves of anxiety regarding the eventual fate of your submission. You know with 100% certainty that it will not be accepted for publication. But also conveniently, no page fees. You may claim to have submitted to the most prestigious journal in the world, judged by acceptance rate. This journal is one of a kind. Merely submitting your work to it can be considered a badge of honor. You can retain complete rights to your work. You are free to submit to other journals even before the review process is complete. And decisions are often, although not always, rendered within hours of submission. So this is a real journal, and I actually hope one day to submit a paper to it. So, any questions? I hope it's hard to say, how to deal with reviewer comments, and really it could have probably all been distilled down to that one page, but perhaps the context and some of the stories make it interesting and give you a little bit of a feel for the human perspective on it, because you really have to think about it as an enterprise of people. All those people in your life and you think are idiots or great or whatever, it's like that in the reviewing process. It's just a collection of people.
I was just going to ask, you have all these specific stats about your own acceptance rates, that kind of thing. Do you keep it for things that you referee? Like, do you know what your rejection rate is for?
No, I don't.
No.
I tend to be the engineer with the comment that always says, I think this is a great paper. I think this is a really important paper. I'd love to see another copy of it. And I do that because I'm of that philosophy that you're not going to keep it out of the literature, and as soon as you reject it, then you have no more control over it. You have no more influence over it. So you might as well work with it and try and make it better.
And so we've given like extremes in lots of these examples. So a couple of you gave some really nice examples of where there's been positive feedback between the reviewer and the authors, right? And the paper's improved. It's like work. There's been a good educated soldier being the reviewer, giving you useful comments. You've incorporated it into the manuscript, been resubmitted, accepted, and become a better paper. And that's like, this is how it's meant to work, and generally it does, right? Generally you don't get crazed reviewers and people trying to rubbish your paper. Most of the time, they're reasonably solid, sane people trying to help you improve your paper.